My family tree hits a wall at 1,870. I spent weeks trying to push past it, clicking through census records and ship manifests, watching names dissolve into bureaucratic silence. Yours probably hits a similar wall somewhere around the same period. Most do. The records just stop, or they were never created, or they were lost to fires and floods in the ordinary chaos of history. I had accepted this as simply how genealogy works. We trace our lines back a few generations, maybe a dozen if we're lucky, and then the documentary trail goes cold. But there are people whose family tree stretches back, not through paper, not through archives, but through voice, through rhythm, through song. They sang their ancestors into memory. They sang maps across a continent. They sang the locations of water sources and safe passages and sacred sites. And they did it with a precision that forces a different kind of respect, precise enough that modern scientists have tested the claims and found the geography underneath the poetry. I stumbled into this while researching institutional control of children in the mid-1800s, specifically the American orphan train movement that relocated around 250,000 children from eastern cities to rural communities between 1,854 and 1,929. The pattern disturbed me. Children removed from families under the banner of protection. Children displayed at train stops in events that functioned like auctions. Children forbidden contact with their origins and expected to simply become someone else. Then I noticed a date that kept repeating on the other side of the planet. Australia, 1869. The first comprehensive colonial legislation in Victoria, often referred to as the Aboriginal Protection Act, expanded government power over Indigenous lives in ways that included the critical detail I couldn't ignore: the care, custody, and education of children. Not only orphans. Children. The hinge point of transmission. Pull at that thread and you end up staring at a knowledge system so sophisticated that calling it primitive doesn't describe the system at all. It describes the speaker. Let me explain what songlines actually are, because the name makes them sound simple. They are not simple. A songline is a navigation route encoded into a song that can stretch hundreds, sometimes thousands, of kilometers. The melody describes the terrain you are crossing. The rhythm indicates distance and pacing. Changes in pitch can mark elevation. The lyrics name landmarks, water sources, seasonal food locations, boundaries between territories, places to avoid. By singing the song in the correct sequence, a person could navigate across deserts, through mountains, and between the lands of different peoples, even without having physically traveled the route before. One documented songline is said to run roughly 3,500 kilometers from the central desert to the east coast, near the place now called Byron Bay. Think about that span. That is roughly New York to Los Angeles. An oral map encoded in music, maintained and transmitted without writing for millennia. And then there is the part that makes modern assumptions wobble. Before colonization, Australia had more than 250 distinct Aboriginal languages and hundreds of dialects. These were not accents. They were different grammars, vocabularies, and world models. Yet songlines crossed them. When a songline passed through the territory of another language group, that segment would be sung in that language. Different peoples maintained different segments of the same continental navigation system, passing it to travelers like a cultural passport. How is that possible? Because the melody itself can carry meaning beyond words. The geographic information is encoded in musical structure and sequence, so different language groups can recognize a route because the tune describes the land, and the land does not change. This is not one community's knowledge. It is a continental network requiring long-term cooperation across hundreds of distinct peoples. This is where my skepticism was supposed to kick in. Oral traditions are unreliable, right? Memory degrades. Stories get embellished. Details shift across generations. Tens of thousands of years of unbroken transmission sounds impossible. The mainstream impulse is to treat these as mythologies with cultural significance but no literal accuracy. So I looked for counter-evidence. What I found instead was verification. Researchers have compared Aboriginal oral histories describing coastal flooding with geological reconstructions of post-Ice Age sea level rise. The stories, collected from around Australia's coastline, repeatedly describe the ocean rising over areas that had previously been dry land. Crucially, they do not mirror this with stories of seas falling to expose new territory. That asymmetry matters, because it lines up with the known direction of sea level change after the last glacial period. Some traditions describe places that are underwater now with remembered names and associations. Old shorelines, former connections between islands and mainland. Submerged landmarks that were once navigable. Geological timelines place these landscapes in the window of 10 to 13,000 years ago. When a linguist says it is gobsmacking to imagine a story being told for 10,000 years, the phrase isn't hype. It's the sound of a modern framework trying to expand. Then there is the kind of story that refuses to stay abstract. In 2024, marine geologists mapping submerged features off Western Australia identified ancient freshwater sources, watering holes now about 14 meters underwater. When a digital model of those features was shown to First Nations elders, one elder in his 90s recognized them immediately as part of a songline he had known his whole life. He had never seen that terrain. No one alive has. The ocean swallowed it thousands of years ago, but the song remembered it, not metaphorically, precisely enough that a person could look at a model of the seabed and say, yes, that's the place. Maybe you could argue coincidence, one match here, one alignment there. But coincidence becomes a weaker explanation when you see multiple independent traditions from across a continent aligning with the same physical process, and when archaeology adds weight. In 2020, researchers reported confirmed ancient underwater Aboriginal archaeological sites on the continental shelf. Stone tools and grinding stones at depths consistent with former land surfaces. Physical evidence that people lived where the stories say they lived, when the stories say they lived there. So the question changes. Not, did the system work? The physical world confirms it did. The question becomes, what happened to it? And here is where 1,869 returns. In Victoria, protective policies created boards with sweeping powers. Soon, regulations enabled officials to order the removal of Aboriginal children to missions or institutions. In other regions in later years, similar regimes expanded. Guardianship laws that made a state official the legal guardian of Indigenous children. Amendments that enabled removal without proving neglect. Practices framed as welfare but executed as control. Across decades, the mechanism was consistent. Target children, the transmission vectors of language and law and land knowledge, and you can disrupt a culture without burning a single written archive. Now look back across the ocean. The orphan trains used a similar logic. Rescue, reform, opportunity paired with separation, renaming, silence about origin. Children placed with strangers. Some treated well, others exploited. Many severed from kinship lines that might have anchored them. The details differ. The moral frameworks differ. But the machinery removal, assimilation, interruption rhymes. Once you see the pattern, it becomes hard to unsee it. You don't need to destroy every record if the records are people. You don't burn libraries when the libraries are songs. You silence the singers. You remove the children who would have learned. What was in the languages now dying? Before 1788, there were hundreds of distinct languages. Today many survive, but far fewer are being passed to children. When a language ends, the songlines encoded in it don't get filed in a cabinet somewhere. They end. Navigation routes, ecological calendars, drought knowledge, legal protocols for crossing territories and sharing resources, memory systems that tracked environmental change across deep time. And if this feels distant, if it feels like a story about elsewhere, watch what happens on social platforms when people try to talk about it now. The same old reflex appears in modern costume. In comment sections, you'll see the familiar dismissal. That's just myth. That's not science. People didn't live that long ago. Then, in the next swipe, you'll see an opposing chorus, short clips of elders singing, threads of young language learners posting vocabulary with pride, maps overlaid on satellite imagery, community accounts sharing place names that survived because someone refused to stop saying them. A viral post can turn a complex history into a slogan, for better and worse. In one corner, people weaponize uncertainty. If it can't be proven, it didn't happen. In another, people turn proof into performance, demanding that every Indigenous claim come with a neat peer-reviewed citation before they grant basic respect. And in between, you'll find something more human, descendants of removed children both in Australia and the United States, speaking into their phone cameras about the ache of missing language, the shock of discovering a birth name, the way a single recovered story can feel like a limb returning. Social media is noisy, but it reveals the stakes. When a thread goes viral about the stolen generations, you can watch denial and empathy collide in real time. You can watch someone ask, sincerely, how could a song store a map? And then watch others answer not with theory, but with lived practice, because we still use it. Because my grandfather taught me the verse that tells you where the water is. You can watch non-Indigenous Australians realize that highways often follow the old routes. And you can watch Indigenous creators reply gently and sharply. We told you those paths were there. You called them animal tracks. Recovery efforts are ongoing. Some knowledge survives. And more is being reclaimed. Language revitalization programs. Cultural burns informed by old ecological knowledge. Digital archives built in partnership with communities. Young people learning verses their grandparents were punished for speaking. Yet, recovery is not the same as restoration. When a chain is broken for even one generation, entire sections of the song can go quiet. I keep returning to the image of an elder recognizing underwater watering holes from a song. A man in his 90s, excited like a child because a digital seabed model confirmed what his culture had carried all along. He knew terrain the sea erased 7,000 years ago because someone sang it to him, who had it sung to them, across hundreds of unbroken generations. And I think about what was broken not gradually, not by accident, but deliberately, within decades, by legislation and policy, and the removal of children from families under the stated rationale of protection. Whether it was inland 100 kilometers or out 100 kilometers, people still live there. The story is still there to tell you. But who decided those stories needed to stop? How much vanished that we will never even know was lost? How many roots went silent when the children who would have learned them were taken to missions or fostered into forgetting? How many languages that encoded survival for harsh landscapes died when their last fluent speakers passed without students? My family tree stalls at 1,870 because paper failed. Theirs can reach back 10,000 years because memory succeeded. And that should change the way we talk about records. It should change the way we talk about who is credible, who is historical, whose knowledge counts. It should change what we recognize as a library. If patterns repeat across continents, if different societies discovered the same vulnerability in human transmission, then the story isn't only about the past. It's about the present, about what we choose to preserve, what we choose to silence, and how quickly a sophisticated system can be damaged when the people who carry it are treated as obstacles instead of authorities. The songlines are still being sung, but every time a language is lost, a section of the map fades. Every time a child is cut off from elders, a thread snaps. And every time we dismiss oral knowledge as just stories, we participate quietly, casually, in the same logic that once made it legal to remove the singers. I'm not making claims about a single conspiracy with one mastermind. I'm pointing at mechanisms that recur. Removal framed as protection. Assimilation framed as opportunity. Children treated as clay to be reshaped. Culture treated as disposable. And I'm pointing at the evidence that some oral traditions are not merely symbolic, but accurate memory. Tested against coastlines and sea levels and stone tools pulled from underwater shelves, my genealogical wall at 1,870 taught me humility. The archive is fragile. The songs teach something sharper. Memory can be durable beyond our expectations, but only if we let it be carried. Only if we don't interrupt the carrying. So when I hear an elder sing a route that crosses deserts, when I read a board regulation that turned a child into a ward of the state, when I scroll past a comment that says, "Get over it," and then a reply that posts a verse in language with the translation underneath, I feel the same question return. Not, what did they lose to time? But, what did policy remove? And what, right now, are we still removing by law, by indifference, by mockery, by the slow pressure to become someone else? Because if a song can remember a watering hole 7,000 years underwater, imagine what else a culture can hold if it is allowed to keep singing.